He said it like it was nothing. Maybe sit this one out, sweetheart. Because Marcus was bringing his rich investors, and apparently I didn't fit the brand. But what cut deeper? Knowing Marcus used Dad's own retirement money to build his self-made empire, and Dad still called me the jealous one. That's when I stopped crying and started printing. I've managed every dollar in that house for 6 years. While they threw parties, I kept receipts. They thought banning me from dinner would silence me, but they forgot. The quiet ones always come back with the ledger. My name is Denise Merritt, and I'm 45 years old. Each morning, I sit at my kitchen counter managing Dad's finances while the scent of coffee and lemon oil fills the air. My late mother, Patricia, taught me the value of keeping a steady home, though Dad only seems to notice when my brother Marcus sweeps in with his polished cufflinks and practiced humility. After Mom passed, I became the family anchor, but Dad's eyes still light up brightest for his golden boy. What Marcus doesn't realize is that I've maintained every spreadsheet, every login, and every bank statement Dad has ever received. My mother's old habit of saving everything, from email archives to document versions, lives on in me. Last Christmas, I smiled through Dad's gentle suggestion that I skip dinner to make room for Marcus's investors, but neglect fattens lies until truth starves them. But let me start from the beginning. 1 week before Christmas, my phone lit up with Dad's name. I was sorting through his monthly statements when the call came in. Perfect timing, since I needed his signature on some year-end paperwork anyway. "Hey, sweetheart." The familiar clink of ice cubes in his evening bourbon made me smile. Dad never called without his drink in hand these days. "Got a minute?" "Always for you, Dad. Actually, I was just looking at your retirement." "About Christmas dinner," he cut in, his voice doing that soft thing it does when Marcus is involved. You know that tone parents use when they're trying to cushion something that's going to hurt? "I've been thinking." My hand froze over the spreadsheet. In the background, I heard ice cubes knock against glass. Again, 3 times, quick and nervous. "Marcus is bringing some pretty important people this year. Investors from Singapore, I think he said. Big money folks." Another clink. "And you know how these business dinners go?" I did know. I'd watched plenty of them from the kitchen while refilling water glasses and making sure Dad's medications were laid out for the next morning. "Maybe," Dad continued, "to avoid any friction, it might be better if you sat this one out." The room seemed to tilt sideways for a moment. My throat got tight, but I kept my voice steady. Another skill Mom taught me. "Of course, Dad. I understand completely." That's my girl. Always so sensible. The relief in his voice stung worse than the request. "Marcus says these investors are pretty particular about, well, you know how these things are." I did know. I knew exactly how these things were. "Don't worry about a thing," I said, my free hand curling into a fist. "I'll make sure all the accounts are in order before the holidays." After we hung up, I set the phone down next to Mom's silver dove ornament, the one she'd always hang last on the tree, saying, "Peace comes to those who wait for truth." The spreadsheet on my screen showed Dad's retirement balance, meticulously maintained since Mom's funeral 6 years ago. That day changed everything. While Marcus flew in for 48 hours of dramatic grieving before jetting off to close an urgent deal, I stepped up. Doctor appointments, bill payments, password resets, all the unglamorous scaffolding that keeps a life from collapsing. Meanwhile, my brother collected magazine covers and speaking engagements, each one proudly displayed in Dad's study like trophies. Remember what I said about saving everything? That careful habit wasn't just about honoring Mom's memory. When you manage someone's finances long enough, patterns emerge, little inconsistencies, numbers that don't quite add up. My hands were steady as I opened the family finance folder. 6 years of statements, transfers, and email threads. The humiliation of being uninvited from Christmas dinner burned in my chest, transforming into something harder, something resolute. "A closed door isn't always locked," I whispered to Mom's silver dove, dragging the email archive onto my desktop. The night stretched ahead, quiet and full of possibilities. You want to know the funny thing about being the reliable one? People forget you're watching. They forget you keep receipts. I've always been good with search terms. You have to be when you're managing someone else's life. That night, I started with the basics. Retirement, withdrawal, Marcus, startup. But it was temporary borrowing that made my stomach clench. The memo popped up like it had been waiting for me all these years. Dad's careful typing, dated 3 months before Marcus's big launch. Temporary borrowing against retirement, strictly confidential, Marcus startup seed. I remembered flagging it back then, meaning to circle back, but Marcus's constant demands kept pulling my attention away. Funny how some fires burn so bright they blind you to the smoke rising elsewhere. You ever sit next to someone who's telling a lie about you? I did, at the country club last spring. Dad was holding court at his usual table, bourbon in hand, telling anyone who'd listen how Marcus was completely self-made. I was right there, adjusting his monthly auto-pay rules on my tablet when Marcus's face flashed across the restaurant's TV screen. Another business magazine cover. Dad beamed like he'd personally hung the moon. I opened a fresh spreadsheet and started matching dates. Marcus's first press tour? 3 large withdrawals from Dad's retirement account that same week. His startup's launch party? Another chunk gone. Each time he appeared in the society pages with that practiced, humble smile, I found a corresponding dip in Dad's finances. The pattern was so obvious, it made my hands shake. I labeled each instance. The printer hummed as I created a timeline, highlighting every overlap between Marcus's photo opportunities and Dad's vanishing retirement. Yellow marker tracked the money. Pink traced my brother's rising star. The colors bled together like a sunset made of warnings. That's when I saw it. A sticky note in Mom's handwriting, tucked into an old folder. Check signatures twice, she'd written. Mom had worked in banking for 30 years before the cancer. She knew all about people who smile while they reach for your wallet. I stuck her note on my monitor frame, right next to the family photo from Marcus's college graduation. He's front and center, of course, while I'm off to the side, making sure Dad's tie is straight. Always the fixer, never the fixed point. Remember that meticulous filing system I mentioned? I clicked through to Investor Weekend Catering, my careful label for anything that needed a second look. Inside was another folder. Marcus Personal. Dad never checked these details. Why would he? His golden boy could do no wrong. My cursor hovered over Reimbursements Final. 6 years of training myself not to ask questions was warring with Mom's sticky note wisdom. Outside, a car door slammed and I jumped. But it was just the neighbors, their Christmas lights casting colored shadows through my window. I thought about tomorrow's dinner, the one I wasn't invited to. Marcus would be there, probably wearing one of those watches that cost more than my car. Dad would hang on every word about his latest venture, never wondering where the seed money really came from. The file waited, innocent as a snake in the garden. You know what's ironic? If they hadn't uninvited me, I might never have looked closer. Sometimes exclusion gives you the clearest view of what you've been, included in all along. My hand settled on the mouse, steady now. Mom's note caught the lamplight. Check signatures twice. Double-clicking that file felt like opening Pandora's box, except I knew exactly what kind of trouble I'd find. The spreadsheet loaded, tabs spreading across the bottom like a card dealer's hand. Each one had Marcus's precise labeling: travel, entertainment, professional development. Let me tell you something about rich people's receipts. They never tell just one story. Take the airline charges. First class wasn't good enough. Marcus had paid to upgrade to private jets. Hotel rooms became entire suites. Client dinners? More like weekend-long parties at restaurants where the menu doesn't show prices. But it was that innocent-looking tab marked Family Fund Reimbursement that made my coffee go cold. You ever watch one of those crime shows where they follow the money? That's what I did, except this trail led straight to my brother's luxury lifestyle. Please handle quietly, Marcus had written to his assistant, forwarding Dad's bank PDFs like they were yesterday's junk mail. Route through the usual channels. The timestamps showed late-night exchanges, always when Dad would be asleep. My brother, the midnight money manager, I started taking screenshots. Not amateur phone pics, mind you, but proper. System captures with metadata intact. Mrs. Patterson, my old business teacher, always said, "Evidence isn't just what you find, it's how you save it." Each file went into a secured folder with today's date and time. The numbers hit me like body blows as I built my ledger. 5,000 here for business attire, 10,000 there for client relationship management. The real kicker? 150,000 labeled emergency capital. Acquisition. Emergency for whom? The only crisis I could see was Marcus's addiction to looking successful. You know that feeling when you're adding up your monthly bills and hoping you did the math wrong? This was the opposite. Every total I double-checked came back higher. 6 figures became 7 as I traced the money through Marcus's clever little maze of transfers. I opened a new document and started drafting my talk with Dad. Had to be gentle. You don't tell a father his golden child's been picking his pockets without cushioning the blow. "Dad, I've found some concerning patterns in the accounts," I wrote, then deleted it. Too accusatory. "I need your help understanding some transactions." Better, softer. Each point got its own paragraph, linked to the source files. Marcus's signature next to Dad's retirement withdrawals. Email threads showing the money trail. Bank statements, highlighting the timeline. Everything organized, everything verified, everything impossible to dismiss as jealousy or misunderstanding. Saturday morning would be best. Dad always made his famous pancakes on Saturdays, a tradition from when Mom was alive. The maple syrup and coffee would put him in a receptive mood. Plus, Marcus never showed up before noon on weekends, too busy sleeping off whatever networking event he'd attended the night before. I practiced my opening lines in the bathroom mirror. "Dad, I need to show you something important." Pause. "It's about the family accounts." Another pause. "I think someone's been taking advantage of your trust." The printer hummed as I made copies of everything. 3 sets, one for Dad, one for the records, one for backup. Each page went into a crisp manila folder, labeled with Post-it tabs for easy reference. Mom would have been proud of my organization, if not the reason for it. My hands shook a little as I clipped the folders closed. Not from nervousness. I'd moved past that into something calmer, something Mom used to call necessary resolve. I placed the folders by my front door, ready for tomorrow's walk to Dad's house. The silver dove ornament caught the lamplight as I straightened up. Truth before peace, Mom used to say when she found discrepancies at her bank. She never knew how much I'd need that lesson. I set my alarm for early Saturday and made sure my phone was fully charged. Then I did what any good accountant does before a big presentation. I double-checked my numbers one last time. Marcus's betrayal glowed from my screen in cold, hard digits. Saturday morning dawned with that perfect breakfast light streaming through Dad's kitchen windows. You know the kind, gentle enough to soften edges, but bright enough to show truth. The coffee maker gurgled its last drops as I spread my folder on his worn oak table, right between the syrup bottle and his favorite mug. "What's all this about, Denise?" Dad settled into his chair, already frowning at the stack of papers. He'd made his special pancakes, just like always, but the familiar smell of butter and vanilla couldn't mask the tension creeping in. "Dad, remember when Marcus started his company?" I kept my voice steady, like I was discussing the weather. "I found some concerning patterns in your retirement account from that time." The first page showed the initial withdrawal, $50,000 tagged as temporary business loan. Dad's signature looked rushed, like he'd signed without reading. I remembered how Mom used to check every document twice, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "See these dates?" I pointed to the timeline I'd created. Each withdrawal lines up with Marcus's company announcements, private jet bookings, luxury hotel stays, even that spread in Business Weekly. Dad's coffee cup clinked against its saucer. "Your brother works hard for his success." "I know he does." I pulled out the email chains next. "But look at these messages. He's been having his assistant process transfers from your accounts without telling you. Late at night, routing through different channels. Stop! Dad's voice cut through the kitchen like a knife through cold butter. Just stop right there. My heart thumped against my ribs, but I pressed on. Dad, please. The numbers don't lie. He's taken over $600,000. Your retirement. I said stop. His hands flattened against the table. You've always been jealous of your brother's achievements, always trying to prove you're the responsible one. The words stung like ice water. This isn't about jealousy. These are facts. We can go through them together. Facts? He pushed back from the table, pancakes forgotten. The fact is, Marcus built something real, something important, while you— He gestured at the folder. You sit here making accusations because you can't stand to see him succeed. Dad, no. He slid the folder back across the table. I won't listen to this. Your brother has investors coming for Christmas dinner. Real business people. I won't have you poisoning that with your jealous reading of things you don't understand. My hands were steady as I gathered the papers, though my chest felt hollow. Mom's voice echoed in my memory. Sometimes the hardest ears to open are the ones closest to home. I'm trying to protect you, I said softly. I don't need protection from my son's success. Dad stood up, ending the conversation. I think you should go now, Denise. The morning light didn't feel so gentle anymore as I walked to the door. Behind me, Dad's coffee sat cooling, pancakes going stiff on the plate. I paused at the threshold, clutching my folder of proof that meant nothing without belief behind it. Outside, I pulled out my phone and typed a quick message to Mrs. Lillian. Need your expertise. Can we meet tomorrow? Morning? It's about Dad's accounts. Her response came back almost immediately. Come by at 9, bring everything. I was halfway down the front walk when I heard it, the distinctive purr of Marcus's convertible turning onto our street. My grip tightened on the folder as his silver car appeared at the end of the block, gliding toward Dad's driveway like some kind of conquering hero. The next morning, Mrs. Lillian's dining room looked exactly like I remembered from Mom's tax prep sessions, all polished mahogany and carefully arranged papers. Sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, catching dust motes that danced above stacks of manila folders. That familiar jasmine tea scent took me right back to watching Mom and Mrs. Lillian huddle over spreadsheets, their heads bent together like co-conspirators. Let's see what you found, dear. Mrs. Lillian adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses, settling into her chair with the precision of someone who'd spent decades examining financial minutiae. You know how some people just radiate competence? That was Mrs. Lillian all over. I spread out my documents chronologically. Bank statements, email threads, transfer records. It started with the startup funding, I explained, pointing to the first major withdrawal. But look how the pattern escalates. Mrs. Lillian's pencil tapped thoughtfully against her notepad. I'll need originals where possible, and read-only access to the banking portal. We need to verify metadata on these transfers. Already prepared. I pulled out my laptop and logged into Dad's accounts, setting up a secure reviewer access. Mom always said you taught her to check everything twice. Patricia was a quick study. Mrs. Lillian's smile turned wistful for a moment before her professional mask slipped back into place. Now then, let's start with these signatures. Her pencil began its methodical dance across the papers, circling details I hadn't even noticed. See these strokes here? She indicated several signatures on withdrawal forms. The same pen pressure points, repeated exactly. That's not natural variation. These are reused signatures, likely scanned and reapplied. My stomach tightened. You mean forged? Mm-hmm. She moved to the PDF files next. And look at these export properties. Multiple layers suggesting digital manipulation. Your brother's assistant isn't very sophisticated about covering tracks. We spent the next hour building a list that made my hands shake. Mrs. Lillian helped me organize everything into labeled exhibits, cross-referencing each piece of evidence with corresponding email IDs. The stack grew steadily thicker as morning crept toward afternoon. We should do a deeper analysis of the signature patterns, she advised, reaching for a fresh sheet of paper. and I want to look more closely at these recurring vendor names. Some of them don't quite ring true. I nodded, already plotting my next move. I can pull a complete transaction history tonight. Less chance of anyone monitoring the access logs at that hour. Smart girl. Mrs. Lillian's approval warmed me like moms used to. Make sure you preserve all the metadata. In cases like this, timestamps and access records can be just as important as the transactions themselves. I was making notes about which files to prioritize when Mrs. Lillian sat back in her chair, expression grave. Denise, if this pattern holds up the way I suspect it will, she tapped her pencil against the growing evidence pile. What we're looking at here is systematic misuse, not just occasional borrowing or sloppy bookkeeping. The words hung heavy in the jasmine-scented air. Just then, my phone buzzed with a new calendar invitation. The subject line made my chest tight. Investor rehearsal, Christmas Eve. Sender, Marcus's assistant. Well, Mrs. Lillian said, eyeing my phone. Seems your brother's keeping to his schedule. My phone's buzz jerked me awake at 6 a.m. Not the usual gentle reminder to start my day. This was the angry hornet's nest of notifications that makes your stomach drop before you even read them. 14 messages, 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails. Hey Denise, what's this about you messing with the family money? Girl, are you okay? Marcus is saying some wild stuff. Please tell me you didn't actually do this. Ever had that moment where your world tilts sideways and you're just trying to catch up? I sat there in my pajamas, scrolling through screenshots Marcus had apparently blasted across our extended network. There were bits of my account reviews, twisted into something sinister. Emails I'd sent about routine transactions, now framed as evidence of theft. All carefully selected, stripped of context, and weaponized. The coup de grace was his message to our family group chat. Deeply saddened to discover systematic siphoning from Dad's accounts. Always hoped Denise's interest in managing finances came from a good place. My hands shook as I threw on clothes and grabbed my keys. The whole drive to Dad's house, I rehearsed explanations, prepared to show him the real documents, ready to break down Marcus's manipulation piece by piece. But you know that saying about best-laid plans? Dad opened the door before I could even knock. His face had that closed-off look I remembered from childhood punishments. Judgment already passed, no appeals allowed. I've frozen your access to the accounts, he said flatly, until this drama ends. Dad, please, Marcus is twisting everything. Let me show you. Enough. He held up a hand. I've seen the evidence. Your brother had his financial team review everything. Of course he did. His financial team. I wanted to scream that his team was part of the problem, but Dad had already stepped back, starting to close the door. We'll sort this out after the holidays, he said, like we were arguing about Christmas dinner seating, not my entire reputation. Just stay away from the accounts, Denise. The door clicked shut. I stood there, keys cutting into my palm, feeling like I was 10 years old again. Dismissed, disbelieved, diminished. Back home, I went straight to my laptop. My hands were steady now, running on cold clarity and muscle memory. But every login attempt hit the same wall. Access denied. Even my read-only permissions were gone. 15 years of managing these accounts wiped away in one morning. When Mrs. Lillian arrived 20 minutes later, bless her for coming as soon as I called, she found me staring at that error message like it might suddenly change its mind. Stop. She put her hand over mine on the mouse. You're going about this wrong. But the records are already saved locally. She pulled up a chair. Now we do this properly. Show me your backup files. For the next hour, she walked me through a process that felt like building a fortress, verifying every local copy, printing key documents for physical backup, getting timestamps notarized, creating redundant drive mirrors. Her methodical approach kept me focused, kept me from spiraling into panic or rage. What about a statement? I asked, opening a blank document. I should explain my side, before Marcus's version becomes gospel. Mrs. Lillian shook her head. That's what he wants. You scrambling to defend yourself, probably making statements he can twist further. Right now, silence is your shield while we build your sword. She was right, of course. Mom used to say Mrs. Lillian could have been a general in another life. She certainly had the strategic mind for it. I closed the draft without saving it. Instead, I opened my off-site, backup utility. If Marcus thought cutting off my access would erase his tracks, he'd forgotten about my IT background. Never underestimate a woman who's spent her life keeping other people's systems running. That's when the knock came, sharp, official sounding. Through the front window, I spotted a courier shifting from foot to foot on my porch, holding an envelope with that distinct legal document thickness. You ever notice how the word notice just hits different when it's typed in formal letterhead font? The envelope felt heavy in my hands, like it was made of lead instead of paper. My fingers trembled slightly as I broke the seal, though I already knew what I'd find inside. Sure enough, there it was. Legal letterhead, threatening language, words like cease and desist, and interference with business relationships, jumping off the page. I sank into my chair, the letter dropping onto my desk. Mom's silver locket, the one she'd made me promise to wear when things got tough, felt warm against my palm as I clutched it. You know those moments when everything you're fighting for suddenly feels impossible? When the weight of what you're up against hits you all at once? Yeah, it was one of those. Mrs. Lillian watched me from across the desk, her eyes sharp but kind behind her reading glasses. She'd seen the letters, contents over my shoulder. Nothing seemed to escape her notice. "Your shoulders are speaking volumes, child," she said softly. Then, with the quiet authority that had made her such a feared auditor back in the day, "The truth doesn't beg for belief. It demands proof." I'd heard her say those words before, but this time they hit different. This wasn't about convincing anyone anymore. It was about building something undeniable. My spine straightened almost on its own. "Okay," I said, turning back to my screen. "Let's follow these vendor IDs." For the next few hours, we dove deep into the digital paper trail. Mrs. Lillian had this way of approaching financial records like they were puzzle pieces. Every transaction had to fit somewhere logical. We tracked payment flows, cross-referenced dates, mapped connections between seemingly unrelated accounts. "Look at this pattern," she said, tapping my screen, where a series of transfers formed a clear chain. "These payments are being routed through at least 3 different entities before landing in their final destination." I zoomed in on the latest transaction cluster. The timing matches Marcus's new office lease announcements, but the amounts are inflated, Mrs. Lillian finished. "Classic laundering structure. Follow that last vendor ID." The trail led us through a maze of subsidiaries and holding companies until we hit what looked like a dead end, an entity registered in Limassol. But something about the registration details made my blood run cold. "Wait," I said, double-checking the document. "This shell company, it's in Dad's name, his social security number, his digital signature." Mrs. Lillian's sharp intake of breath confirmed my fears. If this setup was what it looked like, Dad could be legally liable for everything Marcus had done. The Golden Son hadn't just been stealing. He'd made our father an unwitting accomplice. My hands moved automatically, starting a new document. "We need to map out every risk," I said, typing rapidly, "and then figure out how to protect Dad while exposing Marcus." Mrs. Lillian nodded, pulling out her own notebook. Together, we drafted a detailed memo: potential legal exposures, financial liabilities, tax implications. Next came the corrective path: notify the board of Marcus's company, alert their compliance department, document every step of discovery with timestamps and authentication. I glanced at my wall calendar while Mrs. Lillian reviewed our draft. December 31st jumped out at me. Marcus's big New Year's Eve announcement about some major new partnership, the one he'd been bragging about at every family dinner I wasn't invited to. Standing up, I grabbed a red pen and circled the date. Above it, in clear capital letters, I wrote, "Deadline." "If we don't stop this by then," I said, capping the pen, "he'll have wrapped even more people into his scheme, made himself too big to fail." Mrs. Lillian adjusted her glasses, studying the calendar. Then we better make sure every piece of evidence is airtight by December 30th. On the morning of December 31st, I spread our timeline across my dining room table while Mrs. Lillian reviewed Marcus's event schedule one more time. Ever since Mom passed, I'd made it a habit to keep my workspace neat, everything in its place, just like she taught me. But today, my usually pristine table looked like a war room. "So he's planning the big reveal at 11:45, I said, marking it on our timeline. "Gives him just enough time to sign everything before midnight." Mrs. Lillian nodded, adjusting her reading glasses. Classic Marcus. Always did love a dramatic countdown. She'd known him since he was in kindergarten, back when his only performances were in school plays. "The notary's scheduled to be there," I added, tapping another document. "Once those partnership contracts are signed and notarized, it'll be nearly impossible to unwind without dragging innocent people down with him. You ever notice how time feels different when you're racing against it? Like it's both crawling and sprinting at the same time?" We spent the next hour laying out our countermove, step by step. The forensic packet was already compiled. Every transaction, every forged signature, every masked transfer traced back to its source. Mrs. Lillian had even included a detailed analysis of the signature variations that proved Dad hadn't signed those offshore documents. "Simultaneous sends," Mrs. Lillian said, checking items off on her yellow legal pad. "Board members first, then local news, all queued for 11:30. I pulled up my 2-minute summary for potential reporter callbacks. Had to keep it simple, factual, impossible to twist. Systematic financial misuse, forged documents, funds diverted through offshore entities. No emotions, no accusations, just cold, hard numbers that any journalist could verify." "What about Charles?" Mrs. Lillian asked, softly. I opened another document, the hardest one I'd had to write. A simple script for Dad, stating only verified facts about the accounts in his name. No opinions, no blame, just enough information to protect him legally while letting the evidence speak for itself. "He might not read it," I said, "but at least he'll have it." The afternoon slipped away as we triple-checked everything. Each exhibit was labeled, each file hashed for authenticity. Every piece of the paper trail documented on our chain of custody sheet. Mrs. Lillian reviewed each page with the same attention she'd given tax audits during her 30 years at the firm. Finally, at 10:55 p.m., everything was ready. The encrypted files were loaded, recipients' addresses verified, timing sequences set. I took a deep breath and clicked Export All. That's when I saw it. A small alert in the corner of my screen. Some files changed remotely. "What's wrong?" Mrs. Lillian asked, noticing my sudden tension. "Something's happening with the files," I said, watching the progress bars stutter and stop. The clock on my screen read 10:58 p.m. A new message popped up. "Access permissions updating, retry." My heart jumped into my throat. After all our careful planning, after all the precautions we'd taken, someone was trying to lock us out. Again. Mrs. Lillian leaned in, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. "He must have found a back door to the cloud storage. I checked the local copies. Still intact, thank God. But our carefully timed distribution plan was starting to unravel. The progress bars weren't moving, and we had less than an hour before Marcus would step onto that stage." "How much time do we need to reconfigure?" Mrs. Lillian asked, already pulling out her phone. I did some quick math in my head. 20 minutes to reset permissions, maybe another 15 to rebuild the send queue, if nothing else goes wrong. The system prompt flashed again. "Access permissions updating? Retry?" The clock ticked to 10:59 p.m. Somewhere across town, Marcus would be straightening his tie, rehearsing his speech one last time, confident that his secret was still safe. But he didn't know what was coming. He couldn't know that his careful house of cards was about to meet a lifetime of meticulous record-keeping. I jabbed the retry button and held my breath. The progress bar flickered, then lurched forward. Mrs. Lillian and I watched in silence as permissions reset and directories reopened one by one. "There," I whispered, more to myself than to her. We're back in. You know that feeling when you've been holding something heavy for so long, your arms are shaking, but you can't put it down. Yet, that's how these last few minutes felt. The exports started flowing again. Financial records, bank statements, transfer logs. Each file represented another piece of proof I'd gathered over months of late nights and quiet digging. Mrs. Lillian leaned forward, her reading glasses reflecting the screen's glow as she watched me work. "Start with the signatures," she said, tapping the monitor. "Those forged documents are your strongest evidence." I pulled up the comparison analysis, Dad's real signature next to Marcus's attempts. Even a first-year accounting student could spot the differences. Next came the transfer records, neat rows of numbers that tracked money flowing from Dad's retirement account through a maze of reimbursements and administrative fees. "Don't forget this," Mrs. Lillian said, sliding over a printed email. It was from Marcus's backup server, the one he thought he'd wiped clean. The message to his assistant was crystal clear. "Quietly sweep the reimbursements through the usual channels. Dad doesn't need to see the details." I added it to the bundle, then opened a fresh document for the cover memo. My fingers moved steady over the keys, laying out dates, amounts, and, most importantly, how the liability could fall on Dad if left uncorrected. The tone was clinical, like a bank statement. No anger, no accusations, just facts that couldn't be denied. Mrs. Lillian reviewed each paragraph as I wrote, occasionally suggesting tweaks to make the language more precise. "Remember," she said, "you're not just exposing Marcus, you're protecting Charles." At 11:25 p.m., everything was ready. 3 separate emails sat in my outbox, each with the full documentation attached. One for the board of directors, one for the company's compliance department, and one for the local business desk's senior reporter. I'd worked with enough timing systems to know better than to trust just one method. "Set your phone timer too," I told Mrs. Lillian, "just in case." The next 5 minutes crawled by like molasses in January. Remember waiting for test results in school? This was worse. My whole body felt like it was humming with tension. At exactly 11:30 p.m., we watched the status changes. Sending, sent, delivered. All 3 emails cleared within seconds of each other. "Now we wait," Mrs. Lillian said, squeezing my shoulder. I picked up my phone, opened the voice recorder app, and set it running. If any board members called for clarification, I wanted every word documented. Then I grabbed my coat, the nice wool one Mom had helped me pick out years ago, before everything changed. "You're going to the gala?" Mrs. Lillian asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Someone should be there to witness it," I said, checking my lipstick in the hall mirror. "In person." The venue was only 15 minutes away. The public lobby would give me a clear view of the ballroom entrance without requiring an invitation. I'd chosen my timing carefully. The board members would have just enough time to read everything before Marcus's big moment. I was halfway to my car when Mrs. Lillian called after me. "Denise?" She held up Mom's silver dove ornament. "Don't forget who taught you to keep such careful records." My throat tightened as I tucked the ornament into my coat pocket. Mom had always said good bookkeeping was just another word for truth-telling. The drive downtown was surprisingly calm. Christmas lights still twinkled in store windows, and the streets were full of people heading to New Year's parties. None of them knew what was about to happen in that ballroom. I found a spot in the venue's lobby just before 11:45 p.m. Through the glass doors, I could see people in evening wear milling around, champagne glasses catching the light. A string quartet was playing something classical. The ballroom doors swung open to applause as Marcus stepped onto the stage, adjusting his cufflinks with that practiced, humble smile. Right then, my phone buzzed. A board, member's number lighting up the screen. Here we go. The velvet ropes were cold against my palms as I found my spot in the lobby. Through the ballroom's glass doors, spotlights painted Marcus in golden light while he worked the stage like it was his personal runway. You know that walk successful men have? The one that says they own not just the room, but the whole damn building? That was Marcus's signature move. The string quartet shifted into something slower, probably trying to match the gravitas Marcus was going for. He had that fake, humble smile plastered on, the same one he'd worn in every magazine cover shot, the same one he'd flash at Dad right before asking for just a small favor. I checked my phone, 11:47 p.m. The board members had their phones out, screens lighting up faces in the VIP section. You ever watch dominoes fall in slow motion? That's what it was like seeing those expressions change. Confusion, shock, anger, all rippling through the crowd like a wave. The board chair, tall woman, silver hair, designer suit that probably cost more than my car, made her way to the podium. She was holding a folded piece of paper that hadn't been part of the program. Her heels clicked against the stage as she passed Marcus, not even glancing his way. She leaned in to whisper to the partners in the front row. I've seen people go pale before, but this was different. Under those bright lights, it was like watching the blood drain from their faces one by one. Even from behind the glass, I could feel the temperature in that room drop about 20 degrees. The chair tapped the microphone, feedback squealing through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to pause for a moment to review some new information that's just come to our attention. Have you ever heard a room full of wealthy people go completely silent? It's eerie, like the quiet before a storm hits. The partners huddled together, their whispers probably worth millions per minute in billable hours. Then, slowly at first, they started removing their company pins, those little gold-plated badges that marked them as part of Marcus's inner circle. The lead partner, a man who'd been smiling in photos with Marcus just hours earlier, stepped up to the microphone. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. In light of certain forensic discrepancies that have just been brought to our attention, we are withdrawing from the proposed partnership, effective immediately. The gasps swept through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Cameras that had been lazily panning the room suddenly snapped to attention, their operators practically tripping over each other to catch every reaction. Marcus tried to save face. God, did he try. That media-trained smile flickered like a dying light bulb as he reached for the microphone, but his hand fell short when my phone pinged. Then everyone's phones started pinging. The news alerts were rolling in. Breaking, board receives documents alleging financial misconduct. My knees went weak. You know that feeling when you're in an elevator and it drops a little too fast? That's what, hit me right then. But I grabbed the velvet rope tighter and kept my spine straight. Mom always said dignity doesn't cost a thing, but it's worth everything. The security team by the stage shifted their stance, subtle, but I'd seen that move before. They weren't there to protect Marcus anymore. They were there to contain him if needed. That's when it happened. Marcus's eyes swept the crowd, probably looking for an ally, a friendly face, anyone who might help him salvage this disaster. Instead, he found me. Our eyes locked across the lobby, through the glass doors, through all the years of his lies and my silence. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping even from where I stood. The quartet's last note died in the air, leaving nothing but the sound of cameras clicking and reporters whispering into their phones. For just a moment, in that perfect silence, I heard Mom's voice in my head, "Baby, the truth always finds its light." The lobby erupted like someone had kicked a hornet's nest. Reporters who'd been lounging against the walls suddenly swarmed toward the ballroom doors, press badges swinging. You know that scene in nature documentaries where vultures circle something wounded? It was exactly like that. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Every news alert felt like another nail in Marcus's golden boy coffin. Breaking. Board receives evidence of financial misconduct. Developing. Major partners withdraw from merger. Urgent. Compliance department flags. Serious irregularities. I watched through the glass as Marcus tried to push through the crowd, but microphones kept appearing in his face like mushrooms after rain. His lawyer, some sharp-suited guy who probably cost $1,000 an hour, materialized beside him, already shaking his head. No. Comment. My screen lit up with a text from Mrs. Lillian. Investor lawsuit filed electronically at midnight. IRS just flagged all associated accounts for freeze pending full inquiry. The marble floor seemed to tilt under my feet. I'd known this was coming, had planned for it even, but seeing it actually happen? That was something else entirely. I needed air. The winter night hit my face like a splash of cold water as I stepped outside. The temperature had dropped while we'd been inside. My breath came out in little clouds that disappeared into the dark. Behind me, camera flashes sparked like lightning through the lobby windows. My phone rang. Dad's name on the screen made my stomach clench, but I answered anyway. For a long moment, all I heard was breathing. "Denise?" His voice cracked on my name. "Baby, I saw the news." "Dad," I started, but he cut me off. "No, let me say this." He took a shaky breath. "You tried to tell me. About the money. About everything. I didn't want to hear it because it meant I'd been fooled. By my own son." Another pause, longer this time. "You saved me, baby. You saved this whole family." I leaned against one of those big marble columns outside the hotel, letting its coldness seep through my coat. The same kind of column Marcus had posed in front of for all those magazine shoots about being a self-made success. "We'll fix it," I told Dad, keeping my voice steady like I always did. "I'll walk you through everything tomorrow. Mrs. Lillian's already got a remediation plan drafted." "Mrs. Lillian?" Something like a laugh caught in his throat. "Your mama always said that woman was sharper than a tack." "She still is." I checked my watch. "I'll call her in the morning, set up a meeting for all of us." Movement caught my eye. A side door opening, spilling yellow light onto the sidewalk. Marcus stepped out, alone. No entourage now, no photographers begging for just one more shot. He looked smaller somehow, hurrying toward a waiting car like he was trying to outrun his own shadow. A few determined reporters spotted him. Camera flashes lit up the night like fireworks, turning his escape into a stop-motion scene. Marcus flinching, Marcus ducking, Marcus practically diving into the back seat. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving nothing but exhaust in the cold air. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the smooth silver of Mom's dove ornament. I'd grabbed it on my way out tonight, not really knowing why. Now, standing in the same spot where Marcus's perfect life had just crumbled, I finally understood. Mom always hung this dove in the front window at Christmas, where the morning sun would catch it just right. "Peace," she'd say, "needs light to shine." I looked at it now, turning it over in my palm. The wings were a little tarnished, but the body was still bright. Kind of like truth, I thought. It might get dusty, but it never really loses its shine. I knew exactly where this dove belonged tonight. The drive home felt surreal, like watching someone else's hands on the wheel, someone else's breath fogging up the windshield. Streetlights caught the frost forming on parked cars, making everything sparkle like it had been dusted with diamond powder. Mom used to say winter nights were God's way of reminding us that even darkness could be beautiful if you looked at it right. I pulled into my driveway just as the sky was starting to lighten, that deep blue-black fading to navy around the edges. My key stuck in the lock like it always did when the temperature dropped below. Freezing. Had to jiggle it just so. Another one of those little rituals that marked my days, like balancing checkbooks and making sure Dad took his pills on time. Inside, I went through the motions without thinking. Coat on the hook, kettle on the stove, blinds open to catch the coming dawn. The house felt different somehow, lighter maybe, like it had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. The TV remote was right where I'd left it, perched on the arm of my reading chair. I clicked it on, keeping the volume low out of habit even though I lived alone. The morning news was already running the story on repeat, like they couldn't quite believe it either. "Breaking news in the business world," the anchor said, looking appropriately grave. "Major investment firm Castellan Partners has filed suit against rising tech star Marcus Merritt, citing evidence of systematic financial misrepresentation." The ticker at the bottom of the screen spelled it out in stark red letters. "IRS confirms freeze on all associated accounts pending investigation." My phone buzzed, a text from Dad. "Can't sleep. What do we do now?" I'd been ready for this part. Typed back. First step, call Andrew Chen at Chen & Associates tomorrow morning. Tell him you need identity misuse affidavits filed ASAP. Then, I'll draft a statement template for you. Keep it simple. You were deceived, you're cooperating fully. His response came quick. Okay, baby, whatever you say. Those 4 words, whatever you say, hit me harder than I expected. How many times had I wished he'd trust me like that? Now here it was, wrapped in tragedy and tied with regret. The kettle whistled, making me jump. I poured water over a chamomile tea bag, watching the steam curl up toward the ceiling. Dawn was creeping in, now, pale winter light seeping through the windows. My little artificial Christmas tree stood in the corner, dark and patient. I plugged it in, and tiny white lights blazed to life, throwing soft shadows on the wall. The box of ornaments sat nearby, Mom's old collection, carefully preserved in tissue paper. I lifted out the silver dove, feeling its familiar weight in my palm. The wings caught the morning light just right, sending little sparkles, dancing across the ceiling. Mom always said this dove was special, not because it was valuable, it wasn't, but because it represented something bigger than itself. Peace, she'd say, adjusting it on the branch, isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of truth. Standing on tiptoes, I placed the dove at the very top of my tree, right where the star would usually go. It settled there like it had been waiting all these years for this exact moment. Below it, the printed letter from the board lay flat in the ornament box, physical proof of a truth finally spoken aloud. My shoulders dropped, releasing tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The room felt perfectly still, perfectly quiet. Morning light streamed through the windows now, catching the dove's wings and making them glow like they were lit from within. I looked at that silver dove, remembering all the Christmases it had witnessed, all the family dinners, both peaceful and strained, it had presided over. The words came without thinking, spoken softly to the empty room. Peace only comes when truth speaks louder than blood.